Alright, so this is my latest reverb purchase. So I bought this old effects unit called the DigiTech GSP-21. I don't exactly know the year of it, but it might actually be as old as 1989. The manual that came with this says printed in 1989. I didn't see any obvious dates on the PC board, but I may not know what to look for exactly, being that I don't really date PC boards very often. Anyway, it works. When you plug it in, it works. So I've already tested it before. And it might be hard to see because I've got a studio light on. And the reason why I have the studio light on is because there's a window right behind all of this, which is very bright, which would make the faceplate very dark. But being that this is an LCD display, you can still see the first patch. Now, I went onto the internet. I forgot why I was on the internet. I think I was looking to see like what model and all those kind of stuff. And then someone was replacing the battery, and they were troubleshooting, showing how to detect if your battery is dead. And one way to do it is like you set, you just change your program to some number other than number 1. So we'll just leave it on 9. Then you turn it off and you turn it back on. If it stays on 9, then that indicates the battery is good. If it goes back to 1, it could mean the battery is dead. This one, it goes back to number 1. So the battery is likely dead. In fact, I already know because I took the cover off and I grabbed a voltmeter, and yep, the battery is dead. So I'm going to go ahead and change out the battery. Alright, there was a little bit of corrosion on there, so I just grabbed a pencil eraser and rubbed it off. That's probably not the best way. So that's why I shouldn't be fixing your stuff. Okay, so put the battery in. And I'll just spin it around so that the battery label is up. And I should have a tie wrap somewhere. I'll have to find a replacement tie wrap. But let's plug it back in and see if the memory works. Alright, so we got the battery installed. We have the AC power plugged in behind. We're going to go ahead and turn this guy on. And alright, it boots to number 1. But let's go to number 5, turn it off, and then turn it back on and see if it remembers where it's at. Okay, so it looks like my quick internet search pointed me in the correct direction. So it looks like that's working. And yeah, so other interesting information, if you notice, it just says the GSP-21, and apparently there are 2 models above this. There's the 21, there's the GSP-21 Pro, and then the GSP-21 Legend. And this one just so happened to have an EPROM upgrade from somewhere, so that I have the Legend, and I think also you can find it by clicking the utility button. There it is. Alright. There. Anyway. Okay, so there it is. So it says DigiTech Legend version 1.1U. And I'll just try to drag the camera over to the thing rather than stop the video. And I don't know if I can focus this close, but it actually says the same thing on the EPROM. Alright, I just grabbed my cell phone and took a picture of it.
That's going to be a lot easier to see. But yeah, so big deal. The firmware looks the same as what's on the display.
Alright, so now I'll just take some shots of the circuitry here. I don't know anything about it. I haven't looked at schematics or anything like that. But let me turn this off. Take the power off before I zap myself on camera. But the thing that stuck out to me was this. To me, that appears to possibly be an analog equalizer. And then over here, so these are all op amps, and they're super common op amps. LM833. I'll take that back. I'm not sure what that is. I haven't seen that.
Alright, I went ahead and grabbed the data sheet for the LM833, which I had never seen before. I'm looking at the specifications here, and they actually look quite good. The noise specification is listed as 4.5 nanovolts per root hertz. That's actually quite good. You can definitely get lower, like less than 1 nanovolt per root hertz for audio amplifiers, but you know, this was back in the day. This is probably a 1980s, for all I know, even older than that. So that's actually quite good. The gain bandwidth product is 15 megahertz, fairly decent. This is audio, so it doesn't really need to be crazy high. The slew rate is also fairly respectable at 7 volts per microsecond. You know, not the fastest, but this is an audio circuit. Also, what looks quite good is the input offset voltage is 0.3 millivolts, which is great, although I wouldn't expect this to be amplifying DC typically. But for audio circuits, you might want to have a direct coupled situation or whatever. Thermal drift looks pretty good. And they're touting 0.002% distortion. That's probably with full feedback, though. Anyway, yeah, so this actually looks like a pretty good op amp from way back in the day.
And then over in this section, you see a whole bunch of types of diodes, you know, probably silicon and germanium diodes, quite possibly for the distortions. I had forgotten there were built-in distortions on this, but it's built for a guitar, so of course any effect or multi-effect built for a guitar is likely to have distortion built into it. And who knows what the rest of these are, but yeah, this appears to all be analog stuff. And then quite possibly that's the CPU. I mean, if that's the EPROM, so that means, you know, one of these will be like the RAM. And then I think there's just really generic 7400 series logic gates, and they're through-hole type stuff. You know, this is pretty old stuff. But if this really came from 1989, then yeah, surface mount was out at the time. But it was still really new and still getting integrated into very common electronics. So the whole manufacturing base was still very much a through-hole situation. And I have no idea what the bottom board is, so it's like 2 boards, you know, so obviously we're going to have more analog stuff because you have all of these inputs and outputs. You got some MIDI things going on. But, yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. Yeah, so a little piece of nostalgia that I was pretty happy to buy for not very much money. Basically, I got it for about $100. And so when it loads up, I think it says Legend. Oh, did it go back to 1? Let's see, so now I go to 8, I turn it off. So I already did this test and it seemed like it was working, but... Uh-oh. I wonder what's going on. Oh wow, looks like the unit is actually dead. So after replacing the battery, I noticed a couple of times that it wouldn't remember. So then I ran some tests. I brought it into the other room where the amplifier was, and I would turn it on for 5 minutes and then turn it off At first I turned it off for 1 minute, then 2 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 30 minutes, then 1 hour, and it remembered everything fine. My next thought was, well, maybe there's just a bad connection. You know, it could be that the battery has corroded the electrodes, and if I physically move the unit around or mechanically impact it in some way, maybe there's a quick disconnect and then it loses its memory. But it's not powering on now, and I actually saw this problem the day I received it. It was very brief. It happened just as you see now. You turn it on and there's like nothing. But I just power cycled a few times, unplugged and plugged in the AC cord, and it just kind of came up, and it seemed like, okay, big deal. Now it seems like it's not coming on, and I brought it back in here, and I thought, well, there's a disconnection, so I'm now going to start poking around with my finger or something to try to get it to lose its memory, and to kind of get an idea of like what is disconnecting. And I just took this capacitor and just kind of moved it. And that caused the power to completely stop. But it was also hot, which is definitely not a good sign. Now, it's next to the heat sink, so I wasn't really sure if the heat was just coupling into the capacitor, but it seems weird because this part of the capacitor is so high up and away from the heat sink, which is back here. But something is screwy. You know, a hot electrolytic capacitor is a bad sign, obviously. Yeah, so this is, you know, quite possibly a full 30 years old, so there could be just some issues with the electrolytic capacitors in the power supply. It appears to be just a linear power supply with this transformer, and, you know, these must be the regulators over here. So, yeah, so I don't know what's going on. Something's not happy. I think I know why the capacitor is so hot. I've got a halogen light up here. Right there. That's a 50-watt halogen light, so really, well, I don't feel so much heat. Yeah, I feel it's a little bit warm there. So yeah, the metal would probably start conducting that heat pretty easily. Alright, so what I've done was I've connected my voltmeter right across the leads of the capacitor. It's nice working with through-hole components. Makes it easier to run tests. So this is my voltmeter over here, which is probably about the same age as this unit here. And in fact, it says it's got about half a volt just hanging around there. So, don't know what to make of that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and turn it on. Okay, so we still see nothing, no lights here. And not exactly surprisingly, we don't see a damn thing here. Now, let me... It's probably not possible for me to get this shot here. I don't have a macro lens, but I can actually see... You can hear it. And you can see the lead is loose. And you can actually see it moving. You can hear it moving, and you can see it moving. So, something is funny there. But anyway, I turned this on because I actually got the unit to turn on. I just sort of moved the, I almost called it an antenna. I moved the capacitor kind of, as you see there, up a little bit, and then the unit started coming on, and I figured it kept its memory. Through all of that jostling around, it kept its memory. But, just kind of curious. Now, if I touch the capacitor, I'll probably disconnect. You know, that's got to be the main power supply, with a 5 volt probably. It looks like there's another 2, and that's probably the plus minus 15, 12 or 15 for the op amps. That would be my guess. So I don't see any ramping. It is kind of hot, but it's likely because of the halogen light above coupled with the fact that the room is 80 degrees. Oh, so if I move this, that's probably a bad idea. So you can clearly see. So that might tell you a few things, like maybe the regulators are fine. It's just that capacitor is jacked for whatever reason and probably should just be replaced. Pretty robust. It's keeping its memory despite the fact that I wiggled that, which has got to make all sorts of crazy noise rattling around in there, which is likely not so great for anything. But it kept its... the original problem that I was troubleshooting was it seemed like occasionally it would lose its memory. I got everything taken apart, and I'm using my cell phone with a loop so you can see really close. And the capacitor didn't desolder itself, but you can see that the trace has actually removed itself from the board due to the mechanical stress of a large capacitor that got moved around at some time or another, and that seems to be causing the problem. Alright, you can actually see that someone has been in here before to fix this very problem. I didn't catch that the first time I was looking at it, but you can see, I'll try to get my tweezers in here, you can see a little dab of solder here, but if you move the trace around a bit, you can see it just kind of comes up. So it appears this had already been lifted up and repaired, and it's now a problem again. So maybe that was related to the whole problem of it losing its memory at random times, but I don't know. But this needs to be fixed for sure. Alright, so here's my fix. So I'm still actually testing a different problem where it loses its memory. But it's quite likely related to the problem of the disconnecting power supply. So what I did, it's pretty ghetto. I soldered a wire from the output of the bridge that feeds this capacitor. And I also resoldered the top side of the board because I could see what looked like a ground plane, so maybe that had to be connected. And then I actually fixed the trace on the bottom, which you won't be able to see in this camera view very well. But that was right there. And it actually looked like, even though there was a small amount of solder there, the solder mask wasn't scraped away. Making it harder to make it mechanically strong. It's never going to be mechanically strong. If you just move the capacitor, if that top solder unsolders itself, then it's going to be wiggling this bottom, and it's just going to fall apart every time. It looks like the trace on the bottom only goes to the rectifier, and on the top, through the via, it's feeding the ground. So that might have been the whole problem, the reason why the memory would just sometimes go away. And it just wasn't obvious what was causing it. Alright, fingers crossed. Okay, it's turning on. It looks like it remembered. That's astonishing. I did all of that to it and it did not knock out the memory. So I think we probably fixed this. These old LCDs don't have very good contrast. This is probably just, let's see, it has to be a non-active one. And I guess you press utility again. Okay, so the first patch. Yeah, that's what I saved. So that's actually, I took patch 36 and saved it to patch 1. And then I changed one parameter in it, which was the delay. Let me zoom in. I changed the last delay to 1.5 seconds. Yep. I'm impressed. So I think in a way, fixing the power supply also kind of tested out if there was some sort of a mechanical issue causing the memory to go away. But the whole symptom was it just wouldn't remember. You know, it's supposed to be if you leave it on a certain setting, and when you come back and power it on, like if I leave it on 4, come back and power it on, turn it off, power it on, it'll be back on 4. But what was happening was sometimes it would remember and sometimes it wouldn't remember, and it wasn't really clear why. Had to have been this power supply issue back over here. Had to have been. That would be a very reasonable assumption. So I've got this partially buttoned up, just enough so I can turn it on and see that the power supply seemed to be working. So I think I'm going to go ahead and just close it back up and just start using it and see if it's behaving normally.